For centuries, they crossed oceans without maps, compasses, or clocks, guided by crystals, starlight, and secrets the modern world has almost forgotten. But were these methods science, or something far stranger? Across the cold, mist-laden seas of the North Atlantic, the Vikings sailed with a confidence that still puzzles historians. Long before the age of the magnetic compass, they navigated through waters where the sun often hid behind clouds or dipped low near the horizon. Yet, sagas speak of a mysterious tool, the sunstone, said to reveal the sun's position even on the cloudiest days. Archaeological evidence points to crystals such as Iceland spar, a form of calcite, which possess a unique optical property called birefringence. When light passes through, the crystal splits it into two polarized rays. By rotating the stone and observing the point where the two images match in brightness, navigators could determine the direction of the sun, even when it was hidden. A fragment of such a crystal was discovered in a 16th century shipwreck off Alderney in the Channel Islands, far from Viking lands but close enough in time and method to lend weight to the theory. Modern experiments have shown that with practice, sunstones can pinpoint the sun's location with remarkable accuracy, potentially guiding ships across vast, featureless seas. Still, no confirmed Viking-era sunstone has ever been found. Was this a widely used tool lost to time, a secret known only to elite navigators, or a legend woven into the sagas to explain their maritime mastery? The answer may yet lie buried in the peat bogs of Scandinavia, or beneath the cold waves they once crossed. On a small island off the coast of Greenland, archaeologists uncovered a wooden artifact that seemed ordinary at first glance. Yet it may hold the key to one of the Viking Age's enduring mysteries. Known today as the Uunartoq Disc, this half-broken object was discovered in the ruins of a Norse monastery, dating back to the 11th century. Roughly 7 centimeters in diameter, the disc bears shallow carvings arranged in a pattern that scholars believe once functioned as a type of sundial. Its curved edges and etched lines suggest it may have been part of a sun compass, an instrument capable of determining cardinal directions by tracking the sun's shadow across the surface. For seafarers crossing the unpredictable waters between Greenland, Iceland, and Norway, such a device could have been invaluable. But the disc's real intrigue lies in its possible adaptation for twilight navigation. Some researchers propose that, combined with a sunstone, it could still indicate direction when the sun was low or obscured by clouds, a pairing that might explain how Vikings maintained such precise courses over long ocean voyages. Others argue it was purely a monastic tool, used for marking prayer times rather than steering ships. Weathered, incomplete, and silent, the Uunartoq Disc leaves us with questions as vast as the seas it may once have guided across. Was it a relic of everyday devotion, or the remnant of a navigation system centuries ahead of its time? The truth, like the horizon on a fog-bound voyage, remains just out of sight. In the vast expanse of the Pacific, far from any shoreline, traditional navigators of Micronesia developed a method so precise and so deeply tied to oral tradition that it allowed them to sail hundreds of miles without charts or instruments. This method is known as Itak navigation. At its heart, Itak is not about the movement of the canoe, but the movement of islands across an imagined horizon. The navigator fixes his position relative to a reference island, sometimes visible, but often lying far beyond sight, and measures progress by the rising or setting of stars. As the canoe advances, the reference island is thought to shift from one star bearing to the next. Each star change marks an attack, a conceptual step in the voyage. This system relies on an intimate knowledge of the night sky, ocean swells, prevailing winds, and even the flight patterns of birds. It is entirely mental, a continuous calculation performed without tools, stored in chance and taught through apprenticeship. To an outside observer, the navigator might seem to simply gaze at the stars, yet within his mind unfolds a living chart, where invisible islands drift and the path home is mapped in starlight. Even today, Itak remains partly a mystery. It blurs the line between geography and perception, turning the ocean into a moving map that exists only in the navigator's mind. How such knowledge was first conceived, and how it was passed across generations without losing accuracy, is a question as boundless as the sea it commands. Across the scattered islands of the Pacific, long before compasses or chronometers reached these waters, Polynesian navigators used a system both elegant and exact, the sidereal compass. Unlike a magnetic compass, this was not a physical object, but a mental framework that mapped the rising and setting points of key stars along the horizon. The horizon was divided into named houses, fixed positions where stars would appear or disappear each night. Each house corresponded to a specific direction, enabling navigators to align their course by tracking a sequence of stars as they moved through the night sky. As one guiding star sank below the horizon, another would rise in the same directional house, allowing for seamless course-keeping across thousands of miles. This method was far more than astronomy alone. Navigators integrated it with the feel of ocean swells, the scent of distant islands, the colors of the sea, and the flight of seabirds. Star lines were memorized in chance, with each island group having its own variations, some compasses naming over 30 horizon points, each tied to a distinct celestial marker. The sidereal compass required no instruments, only the trained eye and memory of the navigator, honed through years of apprenticeship. Its precision allowed Polynesian voyagers to connect distant archipelagos with remarkable accuracy. Yet how this complex knowledge spread and evolved across such an immense ocean remains a mystery, a legacy written not on parchment, but in the shifting constellations above an endless sea. In the remote islands of Micronesia, where the ocean stretches unbroken to every horizon, master navigators created maps unlike any found in the Western world. Known as Matong stick charts, these were not representations of coastlines or fixed distances, but abstract diagrams of how waves and swells interact with islands. Constructed from thin strips of coconut midribs bound with natural fiber, a Matong chart mapped the invisible, the refracted patterns of ocean swells caused by landmasses. Small shells or knots marked the positions of islands, while curved and intersecting sticks showed how swells bent, converged, or split around them. By studying these patterns, navigators could read the sea's texture beneath their canoe, feeling for changes that signaled land beyond the horizon. The Matong was typically used as a teaching tool rather than a carried instrument. Students would memorize the patterns, learning how to translate them into real-world conditions. Each chart was personal, reflecting the knowledge and interpretation of its maker, and often guarded as valuable, even sacred, information. Though Europeans first encountered these charts in the 19th century, their origins reach far deeper into Micronesia's past. Today, only a few master navigators still hold the skill to interpret them fully. Whether passed down unchanged for centuries or adapted over generations, the Matong remains a remarkable testament to a navigation system that mapped not the land itself, but the language of the sea. And in that language lies a mystery, one that vanishes the moment the untrained eye tries to read the waves. In the Marshall Islands, where voyaging between low coral atolls demanded an unerring sense of direction, navigators developed a class of stick charts known as Meadow. Unlike the more abstract Matong, which focused on swell patterns for instruction, the Meadow chart represented actual island groups and the sea routes connecting them. Crafted from slender coconut fronds bound with sun-knit cord, the Meadow used shells or small pieces of coral to mark islands. Straight sticks indicated direct sailing paths, while curved or angled strips showed how ocean swells refracted and shifted around land. These lines were not decorative. They encoded how a voyager might anticipate changes in the feel and direction of the waves as they approached or departed each island. The Meadow was both practical and symbolic. It could serve as a route map for a specific voyage, often spanning dozens of nautical miles across open ocean. But like all traditional Marshallese charts, it was rarely taken aboard a canoe. Instead, the navigator committed every detail to memory before setting sail. The physical chart was a reference, a teaching aid, and a record of routes known to a particular lineage or community. Today, Meadow stick charts are preserved in museums and cultural centers, but their full interpretation remains the domain of a few surviving master navigators. To the untrained observer, they appear as simple frameworks of sticks and shells. To those who understand them, they are precise instruments, silent guides to a seascape mapped not by latitude and longitude, but by the living pulse of the ocean itself. Among the most elaborate navigational aids of the Marshall Islands, the Rebelib stick chart stands as both a map and a memory of an entire oceanic world. Unlike the compact Madong or route-specific Meadow, the Rebelib depicts a vast network of islands, atolls, and the routes connecting them, in some cases, covering the full span of the Ralik and Radik chains. Constructed from carefully selected coconut midribs lashed together with sun-knit cord, the Rebelib incorporates dozens of shells or coral fragments, each marking an island or atoll. Straight and curved sticks trace the primary sea lanes, the arcs of prevailing swells, and the refraction patterns that change with proximity to land. For the trained eye, the Rebelib could reveal not only how to reach a destination, but also how the feel of the ocean would shift along the way, an embodied knowledge that blends cartography with the sensory language of wave navigation. These charts were typically large and detailed, meant to be studied ashore rather than carried at sea. Apprentices learned the routes by repeated reference, committing the relationships between islands and swell patterns entirely to memory. In this way, the Rebelib was both a teaching instrument and a cultural archive, preserving generations of seafaring experience. Today, surviving Rebelib charts are rare, held in museum collections or safeguarded by Marshallese navigators who still honor their meaning. To outsiders, they may appear as intricate lattices of sticks and shells, but to those initiated in their reading, they are entire ocean landscapes, encoded in a form that has no parallel in the written charts of the Western world. In the dark expanse of the Pacific night, far from any visible shore, some navigators speak of a mysterious phenomenon called lapa, a faint streak of light that seems to dart just above the surface of the sea, pointing toward land. Observed in parts of Polynesia and Micronesia, lapa is described as a quick, almost electrical flash, often seen in the hour or two before dawn, when the eyes have fully adjusted to darkness. The light appears to travel in straight lines, emanating from the direction of islands that may lie far beyond the visible horizon. Unlike the diffuse glow of the sky over land, lapa is sharp and directional, vanishing almost as soon as it is seen. Its exact cause remains uncertain. Some researchers suggest it may be related to bioluminescent plankton disturbed by wave reflections off land, or the refracted glimmer of starlight and moonlight on converging wave patterns. Experienced navigators, however, do not dwell on its mechanics. For them, lapa is simply another thread in the weave of ocean knowledge, used alongside stars, swells, and bird flight paths. Because it is fleeting, lapa demands intense focus and a trained eye. It cannot be relied upon alone. Yet for those who can read it, it offers a momentary arrow through the darkness, a silent signal from an unseen shore, whether born of physics, biology, or both. Its presence is a reminder that even the emptiest waters may carry whispers of the land that lies ahead. Across the open ocean, where no land breaks the horizon, Pacific Island navigators mastered a skill that turned the sea itself into a chart, a practice known as wave piloting or swell navigation. Every island interrupts the ocean's surface, bending and reflecting the swells that roll across it. These patterns can extend for many miles beyond sight of land, creating a complex network of primary, secondary, and even tertiary wave directions. Skilled navigators learn to detect these subtle changes by the motion of their canoe, a shift in rhythm, a crossbeat, or the faint rise and fall that signals a reflected swell meeting the dominant one. The technique demands not just observation, but bodily memory. Navigators often train for years, lying in the hull of a canoe with their eyes closed, feeling the water's motion through their own balance. They learn how each island's signature interacts with prevailing swells, and how those signatures combine when multiple islands lie nearby. Wave piloting can be used in combination with other methods, the sidereal compass, bird flight patterns, or signs like lapa, but in fog, rain, or starless nights, it may be the only guide. Modern oceanographers have confirmed that such swell patterns are real and measurable, yet reproducing the navigator's sensitivity to them has proven difficult. In an age when GPS pinpoints positions to within meters, wave piloting stands as a reminder that once, orientation across thousands of miles depended not on instruments, but on a deep, physical conversation with the living sea. And the full vocabulary of that conversation still resists translation. In the traditions of Pacific and other seafaring cultures, one of the most dependable guides to land was not the stars or swells, but birds. Known as bird path navigation, this method relied on the predictable daily movements of certain seabirds to reveal the location of islands far beyond the visible horizon. Species such as frigatebirds, nadas, and terns follow regular flight patterns between feeding grounds at sea and nesting sites on land. Experienced navigators could identify these birds at a glance, noting their wing shape, flight behavior, and time of day. In the morning, many species fly outward from land toward the open ocean. In the late afternoon, they return home. By tracking their direction and estimating their range, often up to 50 or even 100 kilometers, sailors could steer toward unseen islands with remarkable accuracy. This technique was often used in conjunction with other clues: cloud formations that gather over land, the smell of vegetation carried by the wind, or the color change in shallow water lagoons. But bird path navigation had one unique advantage: it was self-correcting. Even if currents pushed a canoe off course, the bird's unerring return to land would still point the way. Some modern researchers have attempted to chart these ancient flight routes, yet much of the skill lies in nuances that cannot be captured on paper. The moment when a flock climbs sharply, signaling the sight of shore, or when a lone bird's persistent heading cuts across the waves like an arrow. For those who once voyaged without maps, such signs were not superstition, but a living compass carried on the wings of the sea's own messengers. In the wide reaches of the Pacific, where islands may lie far beyond the visible horizon, skilled navigators learned to read a subtle and reliable sign in the sky, a phenomenon known as cloud loom navigation. Certain types of clouds form distinctive shapes and colors when they hang above land. As sunlight reflects from lagoon waters or from the pale sand of atoll beaches, it can give the underside of clouds a greenish or golden tint, visible from many kilometers away. Over high islands, moist air forced upward by mountains produces towering cumulus clouds that linger in place, their bases anchored above the hidden land below. Navigators memorized the signatures of different islands, the height and spread of their cloud looms, the hue of their reflections, and how these patterns changed with time of day and season. Even at distances where the island itself was still well beyond sight, the cloud above it could reveal its presence, sometimes more reliably than birds or swells, especially in calm seas. Cloud loom reading was rarely used alone. It was part of a larger web of wayfinding methods, combined with star bearings, bird flight paths, wave reflections, and even the sudden appearance of drifting vegetation in the water. But to an experienced seafarer, a solitary cloud sitting fixed on the horizon could be as telling as the beam of a lighthouse. Today, satellite imagery can confirm the accuracy of this ancient practice, yet its mastery still rests in patient observation, the kind that turns the sky into a living chart and clouds into markers of a world beyond the horizon. In the fleeting moments of sunrise or sunset, when the sun's edge meets the horizon, some navigators of the Pacific and other maritime cultures watched for a rare optical event, the green flash. In open ocean wayfinding, its appearance could serve not just as a marvel of nature, but as a subtle signal of land. The green flash occurs when atmospheric refraction bends sunlight, allowing the final or first rays to separate into colors. For an instant, the upper rim of the sun flares an intense emerald hue. Over the sea, the effect is most visible when the air is exceptionally clear and the horizon sharply defined, conditions often associated with proximity to islands, where stable air masses or cooler waters can enhance clarity. Experienced navigators noted that the green flash could be more frequently observed when approaching certain landfalls, particularly high islands whose presence subtly alters local weather patterns. Combined with other signs, the smell of vegetation on the wind, the patterns of seabird flight, or the loom of clouds, the flash became one more thread in the navigator's mental tapestry of clues. The phenomenon remains scientifically recognized yet unpredictable, its fleeting nature making it impossible to rely on as a sole guide. But for those attuned to the sea and sky, the green flash was not merely a trick of light. It was a reminder that even in the last seconds of day, the horizon might hold secrets, and perhaps the promise of land just beyond sight. In the stillness of a moonless night at sea, the waters of certain regions come alive with a faint, ghostly glow. To most, it is a fleeting beauty, but for some traditional navigators, this bioluminescence became another subtle tool for steering across the open ocean. Bioluminescent plankton and microscopic organisms emit light when disturbed by movement in the water. As a canoe cuts through the waves, its wake shimmers faintly, and so too do the long, invisible swells rolling across the sea. Experienced navigators learned to watch how these glowing trails shifted in relation to their vessel. If the luminous flow aligned consistently along one side, it confirmed a steady course. If it drifted, it warned of a change in heading. In certain conditions, the wakes of fish, dolphins, or even distant canoes could be glimpsed, faint streaks of light betraying motion otherwise hidden in darkness. Some voyagers spoke of using these signs to track schools of tuna or to detect the passage of other craft in remote waters. Modern science can explain the phenomenon through chemical reactions in planktonic organisms. Yet this does not diminish the skill required to read it as a navigational cue. Detecting the difference between a steady glow, a cross-current disturbance, or the subtle flicker of reflected swell patterns demands years of night voyaging experience. For those who sailed without compass or chart, bioluminescent wake steering was part of an entire nocturnal language of the sea, one that turned darkness from a hazard into a guide, and the living ocean itself into a glowing map. In certain stretches of the open ocean, long, smooth ribbons of water can appear, their texture subtly different from the surrounding sea. To an untrained eye, they may seem insignificant, but to some traditional navigators, these streaks, caused by microscopic life, were valuable signs. This practice is known as diatom slick tracking. Diatoms are a type of phytoplankton whose silica-rich shells and organic oils can calm the surface of the water when they gather in dense concentrations. These slicks often form along converging current lines, the same boundaries where floating debris, seeds, or drifting vegetation accumulate. In island regions, prevailing winds and currents can cause such slicks to stretch outward from shore, creating faint, elongated trails that may extend far beyond the visible horizon. Navigators learn to recognize the difference between a diatom slick and the surface sheen caused by oil, calm patches from wind shadows, or the irregular smoothness left by rain. The diatom slicks, when followed carefully, could lead toward fishing grounds or even serve as subtle indicators of the direction to nearby islands. Scientific oceanography has since confirmed that these patterns are linked to nutrient upwellings, tidal flows, and seasonal cycles. Yet the art of reading them in real time, deciding whether a slick is part of a productive land-linked current or just an open-sea convergence, remains a matter of experience and intuition. For voyagers without instruments, diatom slick tracking was one more sign stitched into the ocean's fabric, turning the sea's invisible life into a thread that might lead them home. Across the vast Pacific, where each night brought a sky crowded with familiar constellations, traditional navigators carried in their minds not just star maps, but star path chant lines, long, rhythmic recitations that encoded the sequence of celestial guides for a voyage. A star path chant line was more than a list of names. It was a structured memory tool, linking each guiding star to its rising or setting point on the horizon, its seasonal appearance, and the course it marked between specific islands. The chant's rhythm and repetition allowed navigators to recall dozens of star bearings in order, switching smoothly from one to the next as each dipped below the horizon and another rose to take its place. These chants often began with the first star of departure, then moved step by step along the intended route, weaving in the feel of swells, the presence of known reefs, or the sightings of bird colonies. In some traditions, the chant also included mythic or genealogical references, binding navigation knowledge to the cultural memory of a people. Because they existed entirely in oral form, chant lines were adaptable. A master navigator might subtly alter a sequence to reflect seasonal winds or unusual weather. And because they were recited only among trained voyagers, they served as a guarded inheritance, passed from teacher to apprentice over years of practice. Today, fragments of star path chant lines survive in Polynesian and Micronesian communities, but their full performance, a fusion of astronomy, geography, and poetry, remains one of the most intricate expressions of wayfinding ever devised. Each line was both a direction and a promise, guiding sailors across seas where no written map could follow. Before the age of compasses, sextants, and GPS, many seafarers, from Vikings in the North Atlantic to Austronesian voyagers in the Pacific, relied on a method as old as navigation itself: dead reckoning without instruments. At its core, dead reckoning is the practice of estimating one's current position based on a known starting point, the course steered, the time spent traveling, and the speed maintained. Without mechanical tools, navigators used the sun, stars, wind, and swells to maintain direction, while their own senses and memory measured time and distance. Speed could be judged by the feel of water passing along the hull, the sound of waves against the vessel, or the rate at which foam and debris slipped past. In the open ocean, the process became a continuous mental calculation. A navigator would picture the voyage on an invisible chart in their mind, updating it constantly with every shift of the wind or current. They accounted for leeway caused by crosswinds, drift from currents, and even the subtle resistance of heavy seas. The method was not flawless. Over long distances, small errors could compound into large deviations, which is why it was often combined with other techniques such as star navigation, wave piloting, or landfall cues from birds and clouds. But in skilled hands, dead reckoning could guide a vessel across hundreds, even thousands of miles of featureless water. It remains a foundational principle in navigation today, even in the digital age, a reminder that before the sea was charted and measured, it was crossed by those who carried the map entirely in their minds. For centuries before the invention of precise nautical instruments, sailors in the Northern Hemisphere found a steadfast guide in a single point of light, Polaris, the North Star. The technique, known as latitude sailing by Polaris, allowed navigators to hold a steady east-west course by matching the star's altitude to their intended parallel. Polaris holds a near-fixed position above the North Pole, its height above the horizon corresponding closely to the observer's latitude. For example, at 40 degrees north, Polaris appears 40 degrees above the horizon. By training their eye to judge that height, sometimes with the aid of a simple stick, knotted cord, or outstretched hand, navigators could determine if they were drifting north or south of their desired line of travel. Once the target latitude was reached, the ship could sail east or west along it, relying on the sun's path by day and Polaris by night to maintain position. This method was particularly valuable for crossing the Atlantic in the age of exploration, but its roots stretch far deeper. Norse voyagers, Mediterranean traders, and Arab seafarers all understood the relationship between Polaris and latitude. The approach was not perfect. Polaris is not exactly over the pole, and in earlier centuries it lay slightly farther away, introducing small errors. In the tropics, the star sinks low toward the horizon, making it harder to sight. Yet for much of history, it was the simplest and most reliable celestial tool available. Latitude sailing by Polaris turned the night sky into a ruler, allowing mariners to draw invisible lines across the sea and follow them into the unknown. In the southern reaches of the world's oceans, far from the guidance of Polaris, ancient navigators turned to another bright star for orientation: Canopus, the second brightest star in the night sky. The Canopus latitude method relied on its fixed position relative to Earth's axis, making it a valuable reference for sailing east-west routes in the southern hemisphere. In many traditions, Canopus was more than just a point of light. It was a dependable seasonal marker, appearing at predictable times of year and rising to a specific altitude at given latitudes. Navigators could estimate their position north or south by memorizing the height of Canopus above the horizon for known locations, then comparing it during a voyage. Polynesian, Arab, and Indian Ocean sailors likely used this method when voyaging between islands or coasts separated by thousands of kilometers. For example, a navigator departing from Madagascar or the Arabian Sea might sail south until Canopus reached the memorized altitude for a target parallel, then turn east or west along that line. The technique demanded a trained eye and often incorporated simple sighting tools, a measuring stick, a handspan method, or, in some cases, the horizon of the canoe itself as a reference point. Like all pre-instrument navigation, it worked best when combined with other cues. Prevailing winds, swell patterns, cloud formations, and bird flight paths. Though modern sailors measure latitude with exact precision, the Canopus latitude method endures as a reminder of how ancient mariners mapped their world, not in charts and numbers, but in the unwavering positions of the stars above an endless sea. In the vast Pacific, where traditional navigation relied on the night sky as a living map, certain stars served not just as general guides but as precise directional markers. Arcturus, one of the brightest stars in the northern sky, held a special place in this system. In Polynesian wayfinding, its rising point on the horizon was memorized as a bearing to specific islands or chains, making it a vital reference in the star compass. Arcturus rises far to the north of the celestial equator, and its position shifts subtly with the seasons. Navigators tracked these changes, knowing exactly when and where along the horizon the star would appear for a given location. In some traditions, its rising was linked to the direction of Hawaii from the Marquesas, or other long inter-island passages, serving as the first waypoint in a chain of celestial bearings for a voyage. The process was as much art as science. A navigator would sit in the canoe before dawn, scanning the dark horizon for the first flicker of Arcturus. The moment it broke free from the sea line, its exact point was fixed in memory and compared to the canoe's heading. If the course matched the star's bearing, the voyage could proceed with confidence. If not, corrections were made immediately to avoid drift over long distances. Modern astronomy can chart Arcturus's position to fractions of a degree, but the skill of detecting and using its rising by eye in shifting seas under varying visibility belongs to an older tradition. For those navigators, Arcturus was not just a star. It was a trusted companion, rising faithfully to point the way across an ocean without borders. In the night sky above the open ocean, few stellar patterns are as instantly recognizable as the three bright stars of Orion's belt. For generations of navigators, from the Pacific Islands to parts of the Indian Ocean, these stars were more than a familiar sight. They were precise directional tools, forming what are known as Orion's belt azimuth tracks. Each star in the belt, Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka, rises and sets at specific points along the horizon, creating a pair of celestial tracks that could be memorized and used to steer a vessel. Navigators learned the exact azimuth or compass bearing at which the belt aligned horizontally during its nightly arc. When the three stars stood in a perfect row above the horizon, the canoe's heading could be confirmed, even in the absence of other reference points. Mintaka, the westernmost star, was particularly valued because its rising and setting points shift very little with the seasons, providing a stable bearing for navigation over long distances. By pairing Orion's belt azimuths with other star lines, such as those from Sirius, Canopus, or Arcturus, navigators could maintain their intended course through the changing night sky. This method was often woven into oral star compasses and chant lines, ensuring that the sequence of bearings was remembered in the correct order for a voyage. The belt's brilliance and symmetry made it easy to spot, even in partial cloud cover, and its dual presence in both the northern and southern skies allowed it to guide sailors across the equator. For the ancient navigator, Orion's belt was more than a constellation. It was a dependable ruler across the heavens, a triple beacon marking the invisible road over an endless, trackless sea.